Is Shadow the Hedgehog an android? Is he legit or is he fake? Is the real Shadow perhaps the friends we made along the way? Contrary to popular belief, the answer isn't as widely known as you might think, because you'd be surprised at how many discussions and debates around this topic happen on a daily basis between fans. So I wanted to make this video to shed some light on the situation for those who don't know the truth about the Shadow that we have today. And to do that, we have to go back a bit. Let's go back to 2001 Sonic Adventure 2. Shadow actually dies saving the planet from the arc plummeting from space directly at the planet. He dies. Sonic even bids farewell to him and everything, and it's sad and emotional stuff. I'll do a video on the entire game soon. It's just top tier brilliance. Basically, the whole game was arguably focused more on Shadow than it was for Sonic. And he was meant to stay dead. SA2 was going to be his one and only appearance. The problem, or maybe the unforeseen blessing, is that Shadow the Hedgehog became really popular afterwards. So much so that they were pressured into bringing him back, but with the twist. That leads us to 2003's Sonic Heroes. My first real introduction to the franchise, other than playing 2D games by a friend's house and stuff. For an in-depth analysis on the game, check out this video here. Shadow the Hedgehog in this game is found in Dr. Eggman's base as his quote, secret treasure by Rouge the Bat, and she's basically shook because everyone thought he was dead. He awakens and Omega assumes that he's an Eggman's robot, and they fight and Rouge breaks it up. They form their team eventually as Shadow has no memory and Omega is upset with Eggman, so they wanna go get answers from him. A nice touch is that even though Shadow has no memory, he instinctively gets Rouge out of harm's way as soon as he wakes up. Because deep down, he's a hero. Whether he's real or a clone, Shadow the Hedgehog is a hero. Throughout this game, Shadow has an existential crisis, not knowing whether he's the real deal or not, and he starts to wonder and question everything. He even gets taunted by Eggman, actually Metal Sonic in disguise, about having no memory. It could be possible that only Eggman knew the real truth. More on that later though. And they also come across one of the Shadow androids later on. One of the biggest hints of Shadow's authenticity, however, is that Metal Sonic actually copies Shadow's data as the ultimate lifeform data. Unless Eggman made the androids almost as exact replicas of the real Shadow with the same abilities and powers, there's no question as to if our Shadow is the real deal or not. We do get this cold line from Shadow near the end of the story that shows he still believed in himself no matter what his true origin is here.
You'll regret this, Doctor. Even if I'm not real, I'm still the ultimate life form, Shadow the Hedgehog.
But it's not as straightforward yet, because at the end of Team Dark's story, it's revealed that there's actually hundreds if not thousands of Shadow androids in Eggman's base. Rouge tells Omega that Shadow is actually a robot because she still believes that the real Shadow is long gone, but Omega isn't entirely sure about that, stating that for the cloning to work, the original has to exist somewhere. So we end off this game still not entirely sure whether Shadow is the real deal or not, but we have evidence that can support both sides of the argument thus far. Luckily, our questions finally get answered in 2005's Shadow the Hedgehog game. Between this game and Sonic Heroes is where there's a lot of misconceptions about Shadow and his legitimacy. And to get the true answer requires you to play through this entire game, with all its multiple endings, and unfortunately there's actually very few people who actually did this, because Shadow the Hedgehog was such a poorly received game. For more information on the Shadow the Hedgehog game though, check out the video I made here. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be discussing two very crucial elements. Number one is that the story structure and the storytelling of this game was an absolute mess, so I understand why people get lost. Most people in their first playthrough of Shadow the Hedgehog, including myself, played through all of the normal missions, the simplest of the bunch. Basically, get to the gold ring like in most other Sonic games. And the path that this story takes leads you to Dr. Eggman's base. Shadow meets the Shadow androids and then he confronts Dr. Eggman about it. Defeats him and then he deduces that he's an android and that the real Shadow died. So he defeats Eggman and straight up kills him, declaring that he'll rule the army of Shadow androids, and the game ends. For about, I'd say, 70% of people, that was probably their first and only experience of Shadow the Hedgehog. And this is why people to this day still believe that Shadow is a robot. The problem is though that this isn't canon. This is just a hypothetical scenario. It's not the real ending of the game. It's not the true story. There are multiple story parts, each with different hypothetical scenarios and endings that could all be possible, so it's not all part of the real, actual story of the character of Shadow the Hedgehog. The way I look at the Shadow the Hedgehog game, because it really is a mess when it comes to its storytelling, so I don't blame people for not understanding what's legit and what's not, is that it's basically a bunch of what if scenarios all thrown together. Some of it could be true and some of it could not be true. But parts of the truth are scattered and hidden throughout all the different stories in this game. And like Shadow himself, it's up to us, the player, to put the pieces together and find the truth for ourselves. So you gotta play through the game multiple times. Take different story parts and get all the endings so that you can unlock the last story. This is the actual legit ending of the game. It answers a lot of questions. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And people don't even know what happened in it because of how poorly structured the game is and how bad it is at communicating. Like, I was a kid, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have internet back then. I didn't even know what I was doing until I realized I could do different missions and take different story parts and get different endings. I found that out on my own. And the day I unlocked the last story was so hyped for me, but even back then, when I played it, I understood that this was the real, canonical ending to the game. The way I interpret the beginning of this last story is that a lot of people throughout the game were telling Shadow a bunch of different stories about his origins, and I think he was getting a bit sick of it, like the person who was playing through all of these scenarios. And you know, he feels down for a bit, but he doesn't let that stop him. He gets his second wind, he fights through the Black Arms base, confronts Black Doom, goes Super Shadow, heads into the final battle. It's in this very last boss that we get 100% confirmed proof from Dr. Eggman himself that Shadow the Hedgehog is not an android. He's not a clone. He is the real deal. Take a listen.
Shadow, can you hear me? This might be the last chance I have to speak to you, so what I said about having created you, it was all a lie. Everyone thought you died during that horrible incident, but I rescued you with one of my robots. You'd lost your memory, that's all. You really are the ultimate life form my grandfather created.
That settles it. The problem is that this dialogue doesn't play all the time. So even if you played this boss fight, there's a chance that you won't get this dialogue. I'm not really sure what triggers it, but I've seen some people say that it takes about 10 minutes to get to it, which is ludicrous because once you know what to do in the fight, it shouldn't really take you that long to end it. So Shadow beats Doom, puts his past behind him, promising to never turn back, and he looks to the future. So Shadow the Hedgehog is in fact not an android like some people believe. It was left ambiguous in Sonic Heroes, and the story of him being an android in Shadow the Hedgehog was a lie. The android ending is not canon. It's not real, it's not true, it is a what if scenario. That's basically what could have been if he was an android. But no, he is. The one and only ultimate life form, Shadow the Hedgehog. Thank you guys for watching. Click the like button and check out another video. Peace out.